Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see each and every one of you here this afternoon. And I want to thank you on this somewhat foggy day, and earlier a little bit icy day, for choosing to participate in this afternoon's multi-faith dialogue. Today we will be looking at Christian, Jewish, and Muslim stories of pilgrimage and pilgrims. And I know several of you have been here for all three. Some of you, this is your first time. And so that will enrich our dialogue as we move into small groups after we hear the presentations. In the two previous sessions, we have focused on historical and current understandings of pilgrimage in the three traditions. And we've talked together about the idea of sacred spaces, some physical, some more intangible. And today we will hear firsthand reflections from three speakers who have made at least one pilgrimage. The organizers of today's event are passionate about creating space for dialogue. Dr. Daniel Maas is right there, and he is a research associate at Montreal's Concordia University, an instructor at Wilfrid Laurier University, and a member of local Jewish communities. Dr. Idrisa Pandit's not able to be with us today. She's a second organizer, and she does send her warm greetings to everyone. She is the director of the University of Waterloo's Studies in Islam program, which is housed here at Renison University College. And my name is Marilyn Malton, and I'm the third partner in this venture, and I'm the director of the Renison Institute of Ministry. The three of us would want to give thanks for the legacy of Mrs. Helen Marie Wayne, a friend of Renison University College. Her generosity enables us to bring this series of multi-faith dialogues to you. The format for today is in the first half of the afternoon. We will hear presentations from our three esteemed speakers. And then in the second half, we will engage in conversation with each other, with our panelists. So the three speakers for this afternoon, I'll begin with our Jewish speaker, Diana Park. She's a board member of Temple Shalom in Waterloo. And she's passionate about her own search for her heritage and about encouraging youth to connect with their heritage. And those are themes that will be central to her stories about the March of the Living. In the middle, we have Dr. Arthur Boers. He holds the R.J. Bernardo Family Chair of Leadership at Tyndale Seminary in Toronto, and as an associate priest of St. Paul's Lamoureux Anglican Church. He's the author of several books, including The Way is Made by Walking, I brought my copy, A Pilgrimage Along the Camino de Santiago, and Living into Focus, Choosing What Matters in an Age of Distractions. And if you don't have a copy, there are copies of this book and others at the back, and at the break and at the end of the session, you'll have an opportunity to purchase one if you would like. And our third speaker will be Dr. Ali Zaidi. Did I say that right? Thank you. An associate professor of global studies at Wilfrid Laurier University, just down the street here in Waterloo. He is also the co-coordinator of Muslim Studies Option and the author of Islam, Modernity, and the Human Sciences. So please join me in offering a warm welcome to each of our panelists.
Well, good afternoon, folks. I'm pleased to be here. I live in Toronto now, but 10 happy years of my life were here in Waterloo. I lived in Waterloo and pastored a church near here, so it's always good to be back. There's going to be a slideshow going on while I speak, but I'm not commenting specifically on the photos. They're just going to run periodically for some background. And they are from, that's my wife, by the way, I was going to explain. There's a middle-aged red-haired woman who shows up frequently, and if you think that's inappropriate, I am obsessed with her, that's true, but it is my wife, okay? So I think my obsession is okay. And she walked with me on the Camino for the first 10 days and then went home because she had a real job and couldn't afford the whole month for walking. So this afternoon I want to talk a little bit about my first experience of the Camino de Santiago, which is a classic pilgrimage route in Spain, and its destination is the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. The cathedral there has the relics of St. James the Apostle. St. James is the patron saint of Spain, and the Spanish credit him with bringing the gospel there in the first place. Santiago de Compostela has been a very important pilgrimage destination for over 1,000 years. In the Middle Ages, millions of people walked there, and then interest in it fell away. But in the last few decades, it's become popular again, to the point where tens of thousands are walking it every year. I heard a Spanish tourism official say recently that they're expecting as many as 250,000 people a year to be walking it officially. And you may be aware of some of the films that are out about the Camino. The most famous one would be The Way, starring Martin Sheen, which was out just about 4 years ago, as I recall. So I walked on the Camino de Santiago in 2005. I walked 800 kilometers starting in France in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And the first thing you do is walk over the Pyrenees. And so I walked for another month. And one of the reasons, there were reasons that surprised me for being on this Camino. 5 years before, I was in Europe visiting a number of prayer communities, and I had decided that that trip was a pilgrimage. And so one of the things I was doing during my travels was also researching and reading about pilgrimage. And as I was doing that, I kept running into Santiago de Compostela, which was one of the 3 most important pilgrimage destinations in Europe. And I have to tell you, when I read about these medieval accounts, my response was, but why would anybody do that? And then as I realized that more and more people were walking it in this day and age, in fact, somebody I know walked it and wrote a book about it, and the trip just sounded hot and hard and dusty and miserable. And I thought, why would anybody do that? I had no interest in doing that at all. But then something happened. When I was still living here in Waterloo, one weekend, the Kitchener-Waterloo Record had an article about a group of middle-aged women who had walked the Bruce Trail on a part-time basis over the course of a year and a half. And I read that article, and my immediate response was, I could do that. I could walk the Bruce Trail on a part-time basis. I don't actually know why I was interested in that, because I've never actually liked athletics or sports. I dropped gym in high school as soon as it wasn't required. My theory about exercise has always been Mark Twain's approach. If you have the urge to exercise, just lie down until it goes away. But there was something about the attraction of the Bruce Trail that caught my attention. And so, in fact, I began to walk the Bruce Trail on a part-time basis. And there were many discoveries about that that I made about myself, about spirituality, about reliance on cars, on how our neighborhoods are organized. There were all kinds of questions raised for me. And the other thing was that I started to realize that when I did this long distance walking, there was a certain kind of process that happened over and over again. So for example, at one point I took 6 days to walk on the Camino, or on the Bruce Trail rather. And this was 6 days after I just started teaching at a seminary. And it had been quite an intense year, changing jobs, changing locations actually. But when I walked on the Bruce Trail, I found these kinds of things that happened. First of all, I found myself gradually relaxing, and tensions would stream away from me. I felt myself decompressing from the strain that I had experienced recently, and I felt myself dealing with emotional agenda. Next, as I walked these long distances, I grew more and more centered. I was able to pay attention to the beautiful surroundings around me, and I found that I was hearing familiar scripture texts in different ways, in fresh ways. All of this helped me reevaluate how I had been living the last few months, and I realizing that many of my focal concerns and priorities, reading, writing, prayer, family, had not received their proper due for some time. I'm like Bruce Cockburn, who has that lyric, "I've never lived with balance, though I've always liked the notion." That describes me pretty well. When I walked here, I would make clear resolutions about how to live my life differently. And what particularly struck me about this process was that it was similar to how I experience retreats. I've been going to monasteries for over 30 years now, and there too I need to detach and recover from the recent pace of life. I slowly settle into a more life-affirming pace, I'm able to see more clearly where my life has gone awry recently, and I am able to reclaim God-given priorities. So long-distance walking without the structure of setting or schedule of former retreats ended up being as rich and powerful and fruitful as those retreats, with the added benefit of being outside, joining the outdoors, seeing beautiful nature, challenging my body. And so I started to see that this walking functioned for me in many ways with added benefits, similarly to retreats. And so I realized that long-distance walking was a prayerful discipline for me. And when I came across that discovery, I started feeling sorry for myself, because I thought, why don't Christians realize that walking can be a spiritual discipline? And so I felt sorry for myself about 10 minutes, and then I realized, oh, that's what we have in pilgrimage, in the Christian tradition of pilgrimage. And as soon as I made that discovery, I decided to have to do the preeminent walking pilgrimage for Christians and go on the Camino de Santiago. And so there I went in 2005. Now, first of all, I would admit that there are many ironies and paradoxes about how I walked the Camino in 2005. For example, it's a little absurd that I traveled in vehicles more than 8,000 miles round trip for the privilege of walking 800 kilometers. My return journey involved rides in a bus, a taxi, a train, a minivan, and no less than 5 jets. For someone who professes concern about minimizing my ecological footprint, perhaps I should have traipsed somewhere closer to home. There was a time when pilgrimage meant walking from your doorstep and going on pilgrimage. So in medieval times, continental Europeans would walk from wherever they lived, Germany or the Netherlands or the Switzerland, and walk to Santiago de Compostela. There were a few pilgrims that I met on my journey who walked all the way from Switzerland or Holland or Belgium, but most of us took vehicles to a convenient place to start our journey. Another irony for me is that strolling an 800-kilometer pilgrimage may sound like it's pious, but in the truth, it's a great privilege. How many people can afford the time and money for such a privileged excursion? In fact, more than once, someone asked me, what do you do for a living that you can afford the time to do this? Well, as I said, I didn't have a real job. I was a seminary professor. There is another wonder, though, as I think about this as well, and that is this. How is it that people of our day, with the longest lifespans in history and in the history of the world, and the glut of so-called labor-saving devices, how is it that we find it astonishing to think of someone committing serious time to spiritual endeavor? Case Nottebohm marvels that medieval people were able to set aside their lives to walk across Europe in dangerous times, but now, the longer we live, the less time we seem to have. There were other ironies that I encountered on this pilgrimage. One would be, I really admire James the Apostle. I like the idea of James the Peregrino, James the Pilgrim, but I was deeply disturbed by other images of James, namely James Matamoros, the Moor killer. James was claimed as a figurehead for wresting control of Spain back from the Muslim Moors. And in many churches and in the cathedral, there are images of James angrily riding a horse, waving a sword, trampling people underneath the hooves of his horse. Now, James, if you know the story about James in the Bible, James himself was a victim of state violence. He was executed by Herod, and here he has been usurped to promote violence. I found this especially disturbing in 2005 because, as we know, since 2001, many Christians have been justifying violence against Muslims once again. As a pacifist Christian, I'm disturbed by this. For me, one of the most prominent paradoxes of the pilgrimage is the fact that so few pilgrims count themselves as Christians. Many people along the way say they are spiritual, but not religious. They're interested in God and the things of God. They're interested in the Spirit. They believe in something more, but they reject institutions and traditions, dogmas and disciplines of formalized religious bodies. I found it curious and intriguing that they immersed themselves in a taxing route long associated with Christian faith. But in spite of these contradictions and paradoxes, I had a deep sense of being called to go on this pilgrimage. Over and again, as I look at my journals, they reflect both hardship and gratitude, often at the very same time. More than once in my journals, I write, often with surprise, "I feel deeply happy." And the joy was sparked by simple things: good conversations, ample food, a place to sleep, a hot shower when I got one. The joy also reflected appreciation for my physical ability to be able to accomplish such a journey. When I returned from the Camino and people asked me how it was, I usually said, very hard and incredibly good. And as I read my journal, I seldom see any day that was simply easy. Sometimes each day felt like it was the hardest one so far, but each day also had unexpected blessings and compensations. The Camino was my life's most physical and taxing journey, although it does not nearly compare to the difficulties of medieval pilgrimages. Still, it was my longest and most intense spiritual retreat that I've ever had in my life, and it yielded a number of results and fruit for me. In my prayers on the Camino, I thought a lot about the relationship between God's dwelling and ours. I was repeatedly struck by the Lord's Prayer phrase, "on earth as it is in heaven." As I walked, I looked at the vast and beautiful surroundings and prayed with heartfelt fervor that God's good earth could know God's hope and redemption. There was something telling, too, about chanting the doxology as my feet rhythmically encountered the earth and functioned as a metronome, pacing my song. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise God, all creatures here below. Praise God above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Heaven and earth were linked here below and above, ye heavenly hosts. Never in my life have I felt so strongly that connection between heaven and earth. Celtic Christians, we're told, had a notion of thin places, where the veil separating the present and eternity is somehow flimsier. For me, being so firmly grounded, touching the earth with every step, feeling the demands of traveling in this most basic way, I felt as close to heaven as I can ever remember. And one of the factors in this was being outside. Wendell Berry has written, quote, "I don't think it is enough appreciated how much an outdoor book the Bible is. It is a book open to the sky. It is best read and understood outdoors, and the farther outdoors, the better. Passages," he writes, "that within walls seem improbable or incredible, outdoors seem merely natural. What the Bible might mean, or how it could mean anything in a closed, air-conditioned building, I do not know," he says. And indeed, much of the scriptures, in fact, rely on the outdoors, gardens and forests and seas. Jesus often went to the mountaintop or the wilderness or the water. The Psalms reflect extensively on the beauty and majesty of God and God's creation. And I think this is easy to miss in the culture that we live in now. Eugene Peterson speaks of our comfortable, overly technologized world as a place where the wonder has leaked out. I like that. The wonder has leaked out. And I discovered on the Camino that being outside inspires praise and prayer. Another important theme for me on the Camino was the communion of saints. I had a strong sense of the company of saints. I was part of a Christian history and tradition. I was aware that millions of pilgrims had walked this way ahead of me in the preceding millennium. I felt a joyful solidarity with them. This became immediately and practically tangible. I made many new acquaintances along the way, and I mentioned that the first 10 days, my wife walked with me. And after 10 days, she returned home, and predictably, I felt very, very alone. Just before she returned, we took a rest day together. So we stayed in one spot for 2 nights. And I knew that when I stayed in that spot for 2 nights, many of the acquaintances that I'd made would get ahead of me, and I probably wouldn't see them again. And I felt kind of sad about that. But as I walked, I thought about Annette and Olaf and Felix and Nicole and Helena and Paul, how they had all been on this path just ahead of me, just a few days ahead of me. And I took comfort from that, knowing that their feet had trod the very same route. They showed me that it was possible to keep walking, and they wanted me to succeed too. There is a verse in the New Testament that says, "Therefore, since we are so surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us." And so because of my company, my companions who were ahead of me, I was able to walk with perseverance. And it felt really good when you came to a hostel and you saw someone that you'd seen before. It felt really good to relax along the way beside the path or at a cafe and have others show up whose face was known to you. It didn't matter whether you'd even talked together with each other. It didn't matter whether you knew each other's names or where the other person came from. There was a deep sense of reassurance just in recognizing someone. I came to count on this kind of boost along the way. And in this respect, the city of Santiago itself became for me a foretaste of heaven. There was tremendous excitement in that city at reconnecting with people that one had met along the Camino, even some that I had not seen since the very first day. I imagine that the afterlife will be like this, an opportunity to catch up with those that I've lost along the way, friends and family and brothers and sisters in the faith, people that I've lost contact with, casual acquaintances and folks who've inspired me. Strolling around the city of Santiago, I looked at everyone I passed or passed me in case I knew them or recognized them. And I always paid special attention to people who were walking with backpacks because I knew they were pilgrims. It was fun in Santiago to sit at outdoor tables and watch folks pass by. Almost invariably, familiar people would go by. It was difficult to hold a sustained conversation with any one person because other old acquaintances would pop in and join the conversation as well. And it was very important to speak with other pilgrims along the way. We wanted to share together our joys and offer congratulations on completion and compare our blisters and wounds and illnesses. And we wanted to commiserate those who weren't able to walk all the way and resign themselves to taking the bus. With some folks, a brief conversation was enough, but with others, it was important to have a final meal together. Table fellowship and hospitality is so vital to the Christian faith. I have a friend who says, if you can read the Gospels without getting hungry, you're not paying attention. And meals are also apparently important in eternity. So this also seemed eschatological to me. Most of the meals that I had with people were Last Suppers. You knew that you would never see this person again, probably, not in this life. We were from all around the world and would soon disperse in far-flung directions. It's not possible to maintain contact with everyone. So while reminiscing was good, it was also haunted by the awareness that we would soon part and say goodbye. There were other blessings and gifts for me in this journey. While walking, every day I often sang a song from Taizé, which I won't sing, but I'll tell you the lyrics. Bless the Lord, my soul. Bless the Lord, bless the Lord, my soul. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. That song was particularly important for me because of the last phrase, God leads me into life. This rang true for me both on the Camino and as I reflected on my life as a whole. As I walked, I daily reviewed my life journey and repeatedly felt deep gratitude for opportunities and experiences, family and friends over the years. And I saw that God had touched my life in many different ways that were too many to count. This was no naive enumeration. I also revisited hardships and disappointments and disillusionments and sorrows and griefs and betrayals. I took a hard look at my own major failures and mistakes over the years and along the way. And while I did this, I noticed that matters that once had preoccupied and obsessed me now were in a different place in my heart. I was calm about them. I was at peace. Not that I appreciated everything that had happened to me or been done to me, and not that I was smug about where I had gone awry. Rather, I had perspective. I could see God at work even in the hardest times. I often did not see God back in the moment, or even long after the moment, but now as I looked back, I could see God. I had a sense of God's providence even in the greatest tragedies and hardest eras of my life. And here I could embrace the quote that I'd heard from Meister Eckhart at a low point in my life. Whatever happens to you is the best possible thing for your salvation. Yes, I thought, God led and leads me into life. And this awareness is one of the most significant learnings of the pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is intended to reflect our faith journey as it deepens and reinforces our walk with God. I saw the hand of the divine in my opportunity to be on the Camino, in the hard lessons I learned along the way, in the chance to learn more about myself and to encounter many different pilgrims. God led me into life, and so I returned home filled with gratitude. Yet questions remained when I returned. How would I be when I went back? Would I be different? Would I be changed? Would insights gleaned along the Camino inform, affect, alter me? In my final few days of pilgrimage, I had a challenging dream one night. I don't remember the content, only the refrain, the words, I walk at the intersection of the true Camino and real life. Ultimately, authentic pilgrimage bears fruit at home where it overlaps and infiltrates how we live. An 8th century Irish church leader, in a culture that loved pilgrimage and wandering, cautioned against trying to find God on a pilgrimage if one did not know God more intimately wherever one happened to be. She said, to go to Rome means great toil and little profit. The king whom you seek can only be found there if you bring him within yourself. Just as the Camino showed me more deeply things I already knew about myself, so it invited me to be acquainted with my own home and life in new ways. The essayist Scott Russell Sanders notes, pilgrims often journey to the ends of the earth in search of holy ground, only to find that they have never walked on anything else. In Acts 3, there is a story of a lame man who is healed, and the scriptures say he began walking and leaping and praising God. My long journey by foot convinced me that it is no coincidence that these verbs are lined up together, walking and leaping and praising God. For me, worship of God is closely bound up with the wonder of walking. And so I am deeply thankful for the privilege of this providential pilgrimage, and I pray that the Camino will bear the fruit needed so that in the psalmist words, I will walk in the presence of the Lord. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me and for joining us. My apologies, first of all, I was a little bit late coming in and a little bit scattered, and the reason was I was coming from a temple, one of our secular temples, and I mean a hockey rink. You know, I'm a father of a hockey goalie in house league, and it's occurred to me over the last couple of years as we wake up at 5 in the morning on Saturday or Sunday mornings, and we get into the rinks at 7 in the morning, and I see the number of people that are at hockey rinks, and then I drive by the churches and the synagogues and the mosques, and I think, are these the temples of our day? So indeed, in some ways, unfortunately, in our secular age, these have become the great gathering places, and we need to do something about that as well. I mean, it's good that people get together, but as I say to the coach of my hockey team, you know, you also need transcendence in your life. You need something beyond just hockey teaches a lot of great life lessons, but there's something else that you need. And some of these lessons we can get from pilgrimages. What I want to do is talk to you a little bit about the Hajj. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a religious scholar, that is to say I'm not a scholar of Islamic studies. I'm a sociologist by training, and that's where my background is. But I try to live a religious life. I fail, as we all do, with our foibles, but I attempt to be a scholar who takes the social sciences and the humanities seriously, which often raise questions for religious life. But I also try to be a believer. And so wearing different hats and sometimes trying to wear two hats at the same time, which can be interesting but also difficult. So let me give you a little bit about an overview of Hajj, which is the major pilgrimage, and Umrah. Because I expect you know probably less about the details of Hajj and Umrah than you might say about the Camino or other forms of pilgrimage. In Islam, for Muslims, there's two kinds of pilgrimages that we normally talk about, the lesser and the greater pilgrimage. The lesser pilgrimage is called the Umrah. That is also traveling to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. But the greater pilgrimage is Hajj. They involve some of the same rites, but the Hajj has more rites attached to it. The Hajj can take place at only one time of the year, in the 12th month of the Islamic calendar, in the Dhul Hijjah. The lesser pilgrimage, the visit to Mecca and some of the rites, can take place at any time of the year. So you can go to Mecca, you can perform the Umrah at any time of the year. The Hajj is a very specific 5 days in the 12th month of the Islamic calendar. Okay? Of course, there's other kinds of pilgrimages that people make as well. I refer to them here as, say, religious tourism, and we can call those by the word ziyarah, to visit, to make a visitation. Often when people go for Hajj to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, where the Kaaba is, they will also go to Medina, which is where the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, is buried. And so in good manners, actually, what people will do is first visit the Prophet in Medina, give their salutations, and then they go on to perform the Umrah or the Hajj in Mecca. And you notice I say to visit the Prophet. It's not, as believers, a person who dies doesn't simply end, they continue to live. And so when we say we visit the Prophet, obviously we're just visiting the tomb of the Prophet, but for believers it's this deep sense that we are in fact visiting the Prophet. We are visiting the places where he walked. Mm-hmm. Other forms of visitation can also be to Masjid al-Aqsa, the further mosque in Jerusalem, the third holiest site in Islam, as well as for others visiting mausoleums of the son-in-law and cousin of the Prophet Ali, which is in Najaf in Iraq, and so on. So as I mentioned, the Umrah can take place at any time of the year, and it involves some of the same rites as the Hajj. It involves the adoption of this Ihram. Ihram, as I'll show you in one of the pictures coming up, is this white garb that you typically see on Muslim pilgrims, men, I should say specifically. But the garb is only an outer reflection, of course, of the inner state. Right? I mean, we always have to keep this in mind, that the pilgrimages are outer manifestations of the inner pilgrimages that we make to the center of our being as we're making this travel to the outer center of the Islamic universe, you could say. And you have to adopt this ihram not inside Makkah, but outside of Makkah. Before you actually reach this sacred center, you adopt this mental state, the spiritual state, and the physical garb at an appointed place, miqat. So whether you're coming from Yemen, from the south, you would have your own appointed place where you put on the garb. If you're coming from the east, your own spot. And so you have this territory around the sacred city, essentially, where you are mentally preparing to enter into Mecca. The other rites include Tawaf, this circumambulation of the Kaaba, of this house of God, Baytullah, essentially. It involves 7 circuits and counterclockwise, going to the left, which I found curious. In our contemporary time, we always think about clockwise, but to go counterclockwise struck me. And of course, there's no authoritative answer as to why we perform this circumambulation counterclockwise. Some people say it's because you keep the Kaaba to the left, i.e. closest to your heart as you walk. Some people say maybe it's going back in time. Who don't know? I don't know. I mean, who knows what the answer is? Another rite involves performing a 2-unit prayer. So in the Muslim prayer, 1 unit comprises standing, bowing, and then prostrating. That would be 1 unit of prayer. You have to perform 2 units of these prayers at the place called the Maqam al-Ibrahim, or Maqam Ibrahim, the station of Abraham, because we believe that Abraham, the Prophet Abraham, upon whom be peace, was actually at this spot. And another final rite that it takes place in the lesser pilgrimage in the Umrah, as well as in the greater pilgrimage in Hajj, is Sa'i, which involves this brief walking, and I'll show you a short slide, between 2 small hills, Safa and Marwa. And what we're doing in this running between these 2 hills is essentially recreating the movements of Hagar, of Hajar. For Muslims, the mother of Ismail, the wife of Abraham, after Sarah, of course. But in her desperation, in searching for water for herself and for her son, who were abandoned by Abraham upon God's command to leave them at this valley of Bakka, this valley which we now call Mecca. Abraham was commanded, leave them there. And Hajar had said to Abraham, "Oh Abraham, as he's leaving, is this of your own doing that you're leaving us here in this barren valley? Or is this of God's command?" And Prophet Abraham says, "It's God's command." So she says, "Okay, fine. Then we'll be taken care of." He leaves her and this young baby, Ismail, and now she's searching for water, and she's desperate. And she's running between these 2 hills, Safa and Marwa, looking for some sustenance, essentially. And so this is what we are recreating or replicating. We are tracing this paradigm in our attempt to get closer to God, is this sort of searching for God's providence. Now this is the Ihram that I mentioned, the garb that men wear. 2 unstitched pieces of cloth, completely white, completely unstitched. Women also wear a white a gown. Some will wear a black gown. It doesn't have to be white. The stipulations for women are not as rigorous as they are for men. For us, it's just 2 pieces of cloth, unstitched. Now, contemporary men are not used to dressing like this without any underwear flying along, so it can pose problems. And so, in the classes that we had leading up to going, a question came up: what if my ihram falls? And the sheikh who was leading us, he said, "Pick it up quickly." So, in order to avoid that, what some of us do is actually we put like a safety belt or some pouch or something. So in fact, that's what I ended up doing. I just didn't feel secure enough with these 2 unstitched pieces of cloth. So you can't see that there. But so that's what I was wearing. Now, I would like you to pay a little bit of attention to my footgear. I am wearing just, you have to wear a set of slippers or something that doesn't cover your toes, essentially. It has to be, you are stripped down, essentially, to your most primordial state. And this is what the Hajj is about. The pilgrimage is returning to our primordial state. Indeed, the Kaaba itself is, according to tradition, was created by Adam, whom we consider a prophet, the first human beings, Adam and Eve, created out of a single soul. Adam creates the Kaaba or constructs the Kaaba, and according to Islamic tradition, Abraham reconstructs the Kaaba. So we are returning to this primordial house of God, essentially, in our most primordial state. But I mentioned the footgear because even though I'm stripped down to my basic flip-flops, these were decent Croc flip-flops, comfortable. And that was what struck me at the Hajj, is how privileged I was compared to other people's whose feet I looked at, and I saw the calluses and the rough skin and the crippled feet and the missing toes, and I realized, oh my God, I am part of that 1% that we talk so much about. So this is the Masjid al-Haram, the sacred mosque, the sacred sanctuary in Mecca. And this is a picture from the hotel room that I was staying at. So again, a mark of my privilege that I was staying at a hotel overlooking this sacred precinct, essentially, and I could take a picture from my window. The Kaaba is the black square cube, essentially, and then the mosque has been expanded and currently is under massive expansion, massive construction and crane and so on. Fortunately, when I was there in 2012, it wasn't under construction so much, and so I could take pictures like this. But I should say that upon coming into my hotel room, I wasn't prepared to see the Kaaba. I just walked in not expecting to have a window overlooking the Kaaba, and so I closed the curtains because I wasn't in a mental state to see this place, really, that had been, for me, sacred and in my mind's eye all my life, but now to see it with my visible eye, physical eye, I wasn't prepared for it, so I closed the drapes. And I didn't want to be walking around in an not a secular state, but not mentally prepared, I should say. You know, going about doing my business, and then there's the sacred mosque. So there's some of us who actually don't appreciate the grand contemporary modern architecture around the Kaaba. Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam, O God, you are peace, and all peace is from you. One of the things that the Hajjis say as we walk during our rites is Labaik, Allahumma labaik. I'm here, O Lord, at your service. Here I am at your service. And this call is actually responding to the call that God has made for you to come, because we believe that you are invited, you are a guest of God at his house, at the most primordial house. And so this response, Labaik, Allahumma labaik, is I'm responding to your call, I'm responding to your service, O God. I have a short video. I don't know if it will work. We'll see if it does. If it does, great. This was again from my hotel room. I'm just going to move it forward. There's no talking. I just want you to get a sense of the number of people. It's intense, the number of people who are during the Hajj. We have about 3 to 4 million people. This year was slightly less because of the construction, but the year that I was there, it was about 4 million people during the Hajj in a small area of space. And I'll give you a sense of my feelings as I go a little bit as to what I was experiencing, both as I was filming this. This was before the Hajj. So, we were there a few days before the Hajj began. So I was doing this kind of filming. When the Hajj actually began, I stopped all filming because I wanted to be a pilgrim and not to be a journalist. So this was from my hotel room beforehand. I'll come back to that in a second. This is the mountain that I was talking about, one of the small hills where between Safa and Marwa we run. We perform the sa'i to replicate or recreate the cosmic drama, essentially, of Hagar. It's become easier now because there are 3 levels, but at one point there was only 1 level between which people had to run. And so the Saudis have marked off the area where we're supposed to be running by green lights, essentially. And then once we come out of Ihram, we go back to our normal dress. How am I doing on time, by the way? 10 minutes, excellent. Okay, so that was a bit of an overview. The Hajj involves some of those rites, but involves more rites as well. And it actually doesn't involve only Mecca. It involves moving outside of Mecca. In fact, it starts in locales just some kilometers away from Mecca. So what we often do, pilgrims now, is we will perform the lesser pilgrimage, the Umrah, we will do the Tawaf, we will do the sa'i, the running. A few days before Hajj, we'll take a bit of a break. And then on the 7th of Dhul Hijjah, of the 12th month of the Islamic calendar, begins the Hajj in a place called Mina. Mina is a tent city just a few kilometers outside of Mecca. I think I have here's a map of the locale. So we essentially begin actually not in Mecca itself, but in a plain called Mina. From Mina, we will move to a place called Arafah, again a mountain, a small hill. From there, over the course of 4 or 5 days, we will move to a plain of Muzdalifah to spend the night. We will come back to Mina, and then we will end the pilgrimage at Mecca. So it involves a lot of physical movement. It's actually quite grueling as well.
What's the distance?
Yes, the distance is from Mecca to Mina. I would say it's probably about maybe 3 to 5 kilometers. I'm thinking. So it's walkable, and some people do walk, and maybe it's preferable. But there's also buses, can take hours, and then there's trains which can go faster, but it has its own issues, and I'll get to that. And then from Mina to Arafat, you're probably looking at, I don't know, maybe about 7 kilometers. I don't remember exactly, but it is some kilometers. So we come back after, and then we end with the Tawaf in Mecca. And as I mentioned, it only takes place during the 5 days of the month of Dhul Hijjah. And we are essentially following in the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad, who himself was retracing the story of Abraham and Ismail and Hagar. And tradition, and here again I'm making the distinction between scholarly research and tradition, ascribes the rites, or one of the rites, the day of Arafat, the 10th day of the month of Dhul Hijjah, when we are essentially engaged in atonement as recreating the rights of Adam, essentially, of the very first man, returning to our primordial state. Okay. So this is the tent city of Mina. It stretches for kilometers upon kilometers upon kilometers of white tents. And now, of course, the Saudis have made it fireproof, but there used to be times when people would be cooking there. And you could imagine the kinds of accidents that could happen with cooking and so on, because you're there for a few days. Mina is actually very, very trying. You're there, you're pausing there before you move on to Arafat, and you're engaged in prayer. But that's the closest that I've ever come to being at a refugee camp, essentially. Imagine 3 to 4 million people in a small, a few square kilometers, essentially, in white tents. And we were still doing better because we were relatively close. We had very good buffet food. We had relatively clean washrooms. They weren't that clean, but relatively clean. And we weren't sleeping on the street like many other pilgrims who had spent every last penny to get there. From Mina, we traveled to, after pausing in Mina, getting ourselves mentally prepared and engaging in prayer, we traveled to Arafat. People walk. They now have this train, the Masha'er train, which our group ended up taking. And although it's a modern convenience, there's of course many modern inconveniences that pilgrimage entails. This was so jam-packed that we almost felt like sardines. And as we were heading to Arafat on the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah to do our Day of Atonement, and your Hajj is not complete if you don't make it to Arafat. If you don't make it to Arafat on the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah, Hajj is Arafat, Arafat is Hajj. Without Arafat, there is no Hajj. Now on this Masha'er train, I'm beginning to sweat. And I'm sweating, and I'm sweating, and I'm sweating like I've never sweated in my life. And I'm beginning to wonder what is going on here. And I'm hot, and then I realize I'm getting dehydrated. I realized that because my wife had already experienced 2 or 3 bouts of dehydration. This is Saudi Arabia. We're talking 40 degrees here, right? It cools off at night down to 32. But in the middle of the day, we're on this train, and I'm panicking. And then I realize, oh my God, okay, I'm dehydrated. I need to take some water. I need to calm down. I take off my knapsack. I open up my Ihram. I'm a pretty modest guy, but there I took off my top Ihram. It's like, no, I need air, and I need to breathe. And I prayed like I have never prayed before. Oh God, help me make it to Arafat. Ya Allah, help me to perform my rites. Thank God I made it through, got off that train. There was a young woman in our group who collapsed as soon as she got off the train. People later told us it was better to have walked than to have been on that train. So that's what I mean by modern inconveniences. We make things easier, but there's also difficulties. And pilgrimage is not meant to be easy, probably. The day of repentance, the day of forgiveness, that was probably the hardest day. Incredible heat, incredible intensity. And I can't say, honestly, that it was as spiritually uplifting as I had wanted it to be. I was overcome by the heat and everything else. For me, what was much more powerful was actually the Tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba. This is the Mount of Mercy, which is where we were supposed to be on the 9th day. So everybody has to arrive there on the 9th day, 3 to 5 million. So you're spread over this plain, essentially.
One day a year?
This is one day a year.
These crowds are specifically one day.
Yes. On Arafat is the 9th day of the 12th month of the Islamic calendar. If you're doing your Hajj, you got to be there. So you're within, I didn't see it. Not everybody can get up on that hill. So maybe we're half a kilometer away. But mentally, you're seeing yourself at Arafat, essentially. My brother, who just did the Hajj and just came back, he said he was able to actually get onto the mount. I was surprised. But again, this year there were fewer people. There was about 2 million, as opposed to the 3 or 4 that we had. All over the world.
And what's our calendar date?
Now, the reason I keep talking about the Islamic calendar is because it switches back 11 days every year. It's based on the lunar calendar. The lunar calendar has 355 days. The Gregorian calendar, which we follow, has 365. So every year it shifts back 11 days. So when I did it, it was during the month of October, essentially. We were, I think, late October or something like that. When my brother just did it this year, it would have been early October, I think, or late September. Imagine doing this in the middle of summer. And people do. Right? Yeah. What I found amazing about these scenes, and about the Tawaf, is it reminded me of the Abrahamic, if you think about the Abrahamic imagination, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim ideas about the Day of Judgment. This is what I felt. that here we are. You can't move forward an inch. You can't move back an inch. There are so many people, and they're just flowing upon rivers of people. And we are literally trying to stand before God, giving an account of ourselves. And to me, it seemed like the Day of Judgment almost. I am here. I can move neither forward nor backward. I can't help my wife. You have to account for yourself. There is no helping for another person on this day at this time. It almost felt like that. I can't imagine what the real Day of Judgment would be, but I felt like we are all giving an account of ourselves and atoning. Literally, that's what I felt on one of the Friday prayers as well, in our primordial state. It's a return. It's a return to our center and our origin. After Arafat, we come to another plain, Muzdalifah, and we spend the night there in worship. We pause. Some people leave after a few hours, women, children, and the elderly. We didn't take our children, my wife and I. We figured we wouldn't be able to focus on our Hajj if we had taken our kids. Other people do take their kids. This is the Muzdalifah. So you're under the open sky, essentially. And then after that, you return to Mina and you conclude your Hajj with some rites. With stoning of the large jamarat. These are large pillars which represent Satan or the temptations. I have a picture here. These are people who are stoning the jamarat at Mina. Essentially this wall that just goes back, there's 3 walls. And so you are casting pebbles, which you have collected at Muzdalifah. You collect 7 pebbles for 7 times 3, actually, 21 pebbles. You take them with you to Mina and you cast pebbles at the devil. And that casting of the pebbles is representing the devil tempting Abraham to not sacrifice his son. Again, it is that recreation of this paradigm that you will be tempted in your sacrificing of your will to God, in your desire to submit yourself to God, you will be tempted. Will you follow through? Abraham is tempted 3 times, and so we have 3 jamarat, 3 devils represented by these pillars. And Abraham is casting these pebbles to drive the Satan away, drive away the temptations. And this is what we are doing, essentially. We begin with the largest one. If you can conquer the largest devils, you can conquer the smaller ones. And perhaps the largest ones, of course, are within ourselves. Right? We hear a lot about jihad nowadays, but there's a prophetic hadith narration. Prophet returns from a campaign and he says to his companions, you have returned from the smaller jihad and now you must go to the greater jihad. And the people say, what do you mean? We just came back from a military battle. And he said, the greater jihad is the fight against your own nafs, against your own ego, soul. We trim our hair. Women do a small cut if they want, an inch or 2. Men typically completely. We sacrifice an animal. We come out of our ihram. We take off that garb. We perform the 7 circumambulations. We run between Safa and Marwa. Then we again return to Mina, stone jamarat on the 10th and the 11th. On the 11th and the 12th of Dhul Hijjah. And then finally we make the Tawaf al-Wida, the final farewell circumambulations of the Kaaba. These are symbolic acts, or meant to be symbolic acts. Some people take them literally. And we have jokes about people taking off their slippers to hit the devil and cast the devil out, away from them. The thing Saudis have done actually to mitigate some of the risks is that they've made this huge, large horizontal wall so that people on the other side don't get hit by pebbles, by those who get really aggressive in their casting of the pebbles, which people unfortunately do. Farewell Tawaf. For me, the Tawaf was the most powerful experience. Doing it and witnessing it. It feels like a black hole. You are being pulled in these concentric circles, and you're being pulled, really. because once you dive in, at first you see it, and I have to say, when I first saw it, it was scary, because there's this kind of immense rush of humanity and the sound, and you think, oh my God, I got to jump in, and I don't know if I'll come out alive or not, but I got to go in, and you jump in, and you're carried in this wave of people, and it's powerful. And you realize the closer that you get to the Kaaba, if you're on the outside circle, not so bad. If you're on the second floor, not so bad. Third floor, even easier. Longer, but less intense. The closer you get, the more intense it is. The more you're squeezed. You're literally being squeezed from all around. It's a black hole. You are being pulled into something.
What if you sit on the ground? What happens?
God forbid. God forbid. I mean, my wife and I, and my brother-in-law was with me as well. So we protected her. I stood behind my wife. He stood beside her. And so, women often are protected this way. You see big groups, men will be on the outside, women on the inside. But there's some women who are very aggressive, and they'll just push you through, you have to have a will, you have to have some flexibility as well, be willing to be pushed with the crowd, go with it rather than resist it. But then as I stepped away after doing the tawaf, and then I looked from the second and third floor, it ceases to be about individuals. You're not an individual anymore. You're a drop in this ocean of humanity. Really, you are part of this ocean. And the ocean itself, it becomes very metaphysical. The people were not walking, they were floating for me. And it's because I can't see the floor anymore. It's just this white sea, essentially. And the Kaaba itself seems to be floating. It becomes very metaphysical. It's not physical anymore. It's this metaphysical experience where you have left Earth in some sense, returned to the center and the origin. And then you take that back with you. I was sad, just last minute, as I was leaving my pilgrimage experience, and I'm thinking, I don't want to leave the Kaaba. But then this insight came to me that you have to be the Kaaba. The Kaaba is within you. This is a symbolic outer manifestation of what is inside of you. You have to carry it with you. You have to be like the Kaaba. And so when I realized that, then I could let go. Okay, I may or may not come back to this sacred center, but I have it now inside of me. Thank you.
Okay, hi. So I don't have like a real presentation like these other gentlemen did. I'm not a doctor or anything. I don't usually public speak. So anyways, I'm excited about being in their company because I'm happy to be here. My name is Diana, and I'm Jewish. I'm here to talk to you about pilgrimage for Jews, but we don't really have anything like that. I found that very interesting from both of these other gentlemen. We don't have a pilgrimage per se, and I think the Camino thing could be any day of the 365-day year, right? Mm-hmm. And certainly not a day that we might have millions of people go to one specific site, which was amazing. So I'll share a couple of my stories with you, but really off the top of my head, if a Jew was to take a pilgrimage, it would be to Israel. Okay, so I grew up in Toronto. I lived in Toronto my whole life until 8 years ago when we moved to Waterloo. And I used to live in Thornhill, which is just north of Toronto. And in Thornhill, it's a very strong Jewish community. So I lived beside Jews, and I went shopping with Jews, and I felt very Jewish, and I've always enjoyed being Jewish. And then we moved to Waterloo, and I didn't expect to feel to miss Jewish neighbors and to miss my Jewish community. Although I joined the temple here, it was very small, and it's not like living in a community where like-minded people are. And you wouldn't all be here if you weren't all interested in religion and being with like-minded people. So I really missed that, although I joined the temple here. So I started looking for other ways that I could connect. And I had never been to Israel, and I never actually knew why so many people were into Israel. I don't think I ever needed it before. But then when I was here and looking for a little more community, I started thinking, maybe I need to go to Israel. Maybe this is what I need at this point in my life. So I'm 51 now, and 3 years ago, when I was searching for more, I thought, I want to go to Israel. And there's a few organizations in Toronto that organize trips, more specifically for youth, but they also organize trips for adults. And there's a specific organization called the March of the Living. And it's, they take teenagers in grade 11 to Poland to visit the concentration camps and for 1 week, and then from Poland to Israel for 1 week. And some of these organizations are phenomenal in their planning and structure, and they're really good at what they do. So I was looking at this group and thinking, boy, I wish I could do that as an adult. So as an adult, what could I do? I applied to become a chaperone for the youth group, right? So that I could go. I was searching for ways to get myself there. So I applied to this organization and actually was shocked with how many other adults had the same idea as me, and was pleasantly surprised that I was selected and had this opportunity. So leading up to, this was 2012, so I found out I was going to be a chaperone a good 8 months before, and similar to your date that you went at a specific date, this March of the Living group goes specifically to coincide with the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And there is an English calendar date that always falls in the spring, and it coincides with the Hebrew calendar date, which falls for the remembering the Holocaust. In Hebrew, it's called Yom HaShoah. So the trip always goes in the spring, specifically around this date. And I knew I was going in September, so we had monthly meetings leading up to it. And as a chaperone, I was responsible for approximately 10 kids. So we had, in Toronto, grade 11 students, 7 bus loads of grade 11 students that were all Jewish, and 3 chaperones per bus. So each bus had 4 adults. One was kind of the bus leader, and then 3 adults, and I had my 10 kids. So we met monthly leading up to this, and education, and for me it was huge. I found out how much I didn't know about the Holocaust, and learning about life in Poland before the Holocaust, and about the Holocaust, etc. So every month I was going to Toronto, which spiritually for me, made me feel like my Toronto roots again, which was nice, and bonding with these kids. And then the trip went in the spring to Poland. And actually, what I should tell you, part of the draw for me also was that Holocaust survivors are part of this organization. And today's world, the Holocaust survivors are over like 70 years old, 80 years old, 85 years old. They're almost gone. Very soon there won't be survivors. So there's a survivor on every bus. If you're lucky, there's more than a survivor on every bus, but really it's few and far between today. And there's Holocaust survivor speakers. I heard numerous speakers, which was fascinating. And I had an opportunity to really be among the survivors, which was a unique experience, because really in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be the children of the survivors that go on this bus and try to relive the experience for the grade 11s. So anyways, I had that education leading up to it. I went with the grade 11s to Poland. The first day was spent in Warsaw. Sorry, I'm going to backtrack for a moment. I've actually been to Israel 3 times, and I want to touch on it on all 3 of my trips. I was going to say the most exciting was this March of the Living, but that's not true. They were all exciting in different ways. So I'm going to try to go through 3 different trips for you. So this particular trip, when we landed in Warsaw. And again, because these organizations are so well run, the flow of it was emotional. So we spent the first day in Warsaw learning and seeing about the vibrant Jewish past, trying to look at what life was like before the Holocaust, how many Jews were in Poland and in Europe, and how strong that community was. And for me, one of the most notable things was that they took us right from the plane to a graveyard, and in the Warsaw graveyard, approximately 400,000 graves, and some mass graves, but approximately 400,000 graves, which represents today, and this is from before the Holocaust, more people than the Jewish population in Toronto, 400,000. So, to be standing in a graveyard where people were buried from pre-Holocaust. Those are huge numbers, and they were really trying to represent how vibrant a community existed. And then it took our group through 7 days of visiting 6 different concentration camp sites. I went to Majdanek, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Belzec, and Treblinka. For me, very emotional. I personally don't have any close relatives that had perished in the Holocaust, although many of the kids and the people there had a grandfather or a close relative. I didn't have a close relative, although certainly 2 or 3 generations back, my grandmother's cousins, not close, but it was still impactful. And then the part of being there on the specific date is that this organization now meets individuals from around the world. It's not a pilgrimage per se, but it's a thing now that happens every spring on Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Remembrance Day, that Jews come from all over the world to Auschwitz. I don't know if has anyone ever heard of this? Okay, so they meet in Auschwitz on the Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Approximately 10,000 people from around the world, mostly students, so mostly all grade 11 kids from other communities all around the world. And I was part of a march from Auschwitz to Birkenau, which is it was a short walk. It wasn't a long walk. But we stood like in this massive lineup of people that spoke different languages, but were all Jewish. And it was really a very strong and meaningful experience. And we walked in silence. Everybody tried to there was a silent tone to this walk. And hopefully for this youth too, there's recognition that we're all really the same. We speak different languages and we're all here and we're all remembering together. From that was kind of the end of the week in Poland. And it was sad, but it wasn't, the group did such a good way. It wasn't meant to leave everyone tearful and sad. It was meant to be exploring and learning about our heritage and then picking up and flying to Israel. And as soon as the plane touched down in Israel, it turned into celebrating our future. And they really did a great job of taking these kids and showing that was the past, this is what happens when you don't remember, this is our future. And I'll just give you one last sentence about that specific March of the Living, but they also really teach to today's generation the importance of not being a bystander. So the words are changed today to make it more age specific, in that what can you do to make a difference today, as opposed like not being a bystander. And I've got a sentence here that says, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And really, this is the world with these kids that are bullied on cyberbullying today and high school bullying. They really tried to make it very relevant. Don't be a bystander, don't stand by, don't watch somebody being beaten up. Whether it's religious, whether it's because they're fat or they're tall or they've got dark hair, whatever it is, don't be a bystander, is being taught in that whole lessons around the Holocaust today, and the survivors today are really speaking about not being a bystander today. But then I want to move now that then we landed in Israel. And I had never been to Israel, and I was really like, poo-poo, why is everyone so excited about Israel? I'm excited to go to Israel, but I didn't really quite get it. And then we landed, and everyone was cheering, and then you get out of the bus, and particularly coming from after Poland was amazing to land in Israel, and suddenly to be able to be free to be Jewish. In Israel, you can feel Jewish, you can wear a Jewish star, you can comfortably talk about Jewish holidays without thinking who's listening and being somewhat uncomfortable, because it's challenging to be a minority. Some of you are minorities here. And in Waterloo, it's challenging to be a minority here. But anyways, I so enjoyed Israel. If there's perhaps a pilgrimage spot for Jews in Israel, it's at the Wailing Wall, which Jews call the Kotel. And I was very touched standing there, being there. I felt very emotional being there, more emotional than I expected to feel. I enjoyed being with the kids. I was able to be a support for the kids and take back my own growth. I viewed it as a personal growth opportunity, and I can't really, it's difficult to describe really what I felt. Your words were really amazing with some of the words. You know, different religions, we still feel the same emotion.
Sure.
So I felt tremendous emotion being there, to the point that when I came home, I said to my husband and my kids, we're going to Israel. And my husband said, well, it's too expensive, we're not going to Israel. I said, we're going to Israel. And he said the same, we're not going. I said, I'm planning it, we're going to Israel. And 13 months later, we went to Israel. And I can't verbalize why I needed to go back, and why I needed for my kids to go, and I needed for my husband to go, and my mother, who had never been, had to go, and my mother's husband had to go, who had never been, and my mother-in-law, who had been 25 years ago, came with us, and her husband, who had been 30 years ago, came with us. And I organized for my 3 daughters and my husband and I, and then I said to the 2 sets of grandparents, which my mother, you know, at their own expense, we want you to come. So 9 of us went back 13 months later, mainly because I said, we have to go. We have to go. I can't tell you why we have to go to Israel. Probably similar to why you have to walk the Camino, why you have to go on this with those crowds. I can't even imagine being in those crowds. So anyways, we went back, and I hired a guide and a van for 9 people and the driver, and he took us around like a semicircle, a clockwise circle all around Israel, and visiting Jewish sites, and that had a huge meaning for me on 2 levels. One was the being in Israel, being able to feel so Jewish in Israel, and being with my immediate family and their grandparents. I really felt I was giving the grandparents a gift and my kids a gift, and it was amazing. They all wanted the 2 sets of grandparents said, when can we do this again? And I said, we're never doing this again. So it was not always easy to be together every minute, but it was wonderful. So, and then I came back from that about 18 months ago, and I will say we were all changed. You can't take some type of a trip like all of these trips without changing. And I loved your description at the end. We carry it after. We carry it. You know, we change, and then we carry it, and we bring it home with us. So I was searching now for another reason to go back, because I can't seem to get enough now. And again, in Toronto, there's different organizations that are mainly reaching out to youth, but I found an organization that's reaching out to mothers. So before I tell you about my 3rd trip, let me say, I think interest in religion is decreasing. You know, we're all roughly the same age. We're all worried because our kids are less interested in religion. All the youth in all the religions, I think interest is down. It's down in Judaism, I think it's down in all religions. So maybe this is why some of the organizations in Toronto are subsidizing trips and trying to get youth to go, and trying to really push our youth to Israel today. So I found this organization that is taking mothers on a subsidized trip. It's called a Birthright, which is an organization that takes youth. Now there's an organization called Birthright for Moms, and they want to take mothers to Israel so that they can infuse you with this love of Judaism and love of heritage and education, and bring it home and distribute it at home. Because the mothers are the ones that run the ship at home, right? It's a lot of what we choose to tell our children and bring, whether we make nice meals or whatever we do in our home. So I found this organization, and I applied, and I got on, and I was counting down, and I just went in October, and it was a group of 200 women from the United States and Canada. Small from this particular trip was small in Canada, mainly in the US, but 200 women that traveled in 4 buses together, a little bit of sightseeing, but mainly education. So it was exciting on a few different levels. I had already been in Israel. I was already excited about many of the sites we had seen. I was already excited about the way you feel in Israel. But this particular trip, firstly, being with 200 women, you know, how often are we ever with 200 men all together, 200 women all together? So the talk is different. There's a comfort level. That was lovely. But it was run by Orthodox, which is our most religious group. So they're taking mothers, and they're saying, we want you to become more religious. But whether it's one baby step more religious or whether it's 100 steps more religious, didn't really matter to them. We want to take mothers so that you can bring this home and you can infuse it into your families. And I think they're doing a very successful job of that. So it was run by Orthodox, which is our most strict level of Judaism. And even within our own religions, sometimes we don't know that much about all the different levels. So I actually have never spent quality time with the most religious Jews, the ones that wear the black hats and the ones that look like the whole outfit and everything in movies. And I'd always been a little bit afraid of them, and I'm Jewish. Anyways, they were the organizers and they were among us, mainly women, really the women. And it was fantastic. It was amazing to see that these very strict women were really like me. Right? We're all the same. At the end of the day, we all care about our kids and we all care about our homes and our families. And you know, the bottom line is we're all women. We all love each other and our families. So anyways, it was an amazing trip. And I learned so much about orthodoxy. Right? Each trip has been different in terms of what I've learned. I came back from that just last month. Now I've got to find another way to get back. And I'm sure I'll find something else to get back. But anyways, that's I'm probably a little bit short. Yeah.
How many of the 200 women were Orthodox or Reform? Or
all ordinary. I used to say normal. All ordinary. They didn't. If you were Orthodox, you couldn't go. So I had to apply and have an interview to go. So they weren't looking for people who were already learned. They were looking for ordinary. Yeah, yeah.
When you say Orthodox, are you talking about Hasidic Jews?
Yes. So not only that's kind of one little piece, but Orthodox of that level. So well, and this is what was so amazing. Well, yeah. Well, and I don't really want to. It's kind of scary when you start looking at some of these elitists. Like it's the women. The women wear wigs. They wear wigs because their hair is holy to them. Like, and I'm Jewish, and I don't believe that. Okay, so I don't like to sway people into thinking that it's an extreme. Their hair was covered. They were long outfits, and they were they were so open and genuine. And I've never heard women like that talking before. So because we were all together and they were comfortable and we were the same. So for example, we went swimming in the Dead Sea one day and they were making jokes like, it doesn't matter if my hair gets wet, I have another wig in my bag. I couldn't believe it. How normal, right? I didn't expect it. And it was really an eye-opener to me, let alone as a non-Jew to be with them would have been really fascinated too. Yeah. Yes.
I was just going to ask.
Yeah.
I thought the women in Hasidic Jews, don't they shave their heads in marriage or something?
I have never heard that. I'm not familiar with that. I've never heard that. I know they cover their hair. I don't think they
wore the wig.
No, I think they cover their, and I think the opposite. I think, and I'm not an expert, that they cover their hair because their hair is holy and they save it for their husbands. So that when they take their wigs off at night, and that's why their arms are covered and their legs are covered, that when they undress at night, they're beautiful for their husbands. I don't think they shave their heads because I think they want to be beautiful. Yeah.
So it's like, you mentioned that earlier that there is no tradition of pilgrimage in Judaism.
Yes.
So this is like an example of a modern sort of tradition, like creating a modern tradition, an example of that.
Sorry, would this particular trip be a
It's like, I mean, okay, we recognize we don't have a kind of pilgrimage tradition, but so let's create a modern sort of.
Yes, it is. Well, I think any trip to Israel at any week, at any time, would be a pilgrimage. So I think anyone who takes their family or goes alone or sends their kids, I would describe as a pilgrimage. If a Jew goes to Israel, I would say would have to be the equivalent of a pilgrimage. Although I don't think that's a word that we typically use. A pilgrimage is not a Jewish word for saying I'm going to Israel. Yeah.
I'm
Am I
delighted
over?
with all
Yeah.
the questions.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear all the questions. I know that there are lots bubbling around here. And what we're going to do is have a chance for the panelists to ask each other questions. And then there will be many opportunities for you in the small groups to talk together about your questions, chance to ask all of the panelists questions at the end. So is that okay? All righty. So obviously there are lots of things bubbling, which is wonderful. Daniel has some pieces of paper and some pens if you don't have one. We just want everybody to take a deep breath. Think of all the richness of what you've just heard from the three presenters. And it might be helpful to think of a couple of things. What caught your attention? Maybe it's a theme that was sort of running through the three presentations. Maybe it was one particular thing in one of the presentations. What caught your attention? What questions do you still have? Obviously, there are lots of them out there. Have a chance to write those down. You'll have a chance in your small groups. And what new information or insight did you gain? Maybe about another religion, maybe about yourself. I don't know. But what new insight or information did you gain from the presentations? And so just take a few moments in silence to write those down. Then we'll move into a break. So people who'd like to write a bit longer can do that. Those who'd like a break, there are refreshments at the back. The washrooms, the women's washroom is right outside the door to the left. The men's is across our cafeteria and to the left there. We'll reconvene at 3:45. And at that point, we'll move into small groups and we'll start gathering all these questions and insights that, or no, first of all, we're going to have the panelists, sorry, and then we'll move into small groups. Okay, is that clear? Wonderful.
Okay, so a couple of things are going to happen before we break up into small groups. And the first thing that's going to happen is the panelists who have heard each other are going to ask questions of each other, discuss, make comments to each other, and we're going to listen in on their conversation with each other. After which, we're going to then read some of the questions that you have given to me that came out of their presentations that were important to you. And we'll have each of the panelists address these questions, and if it's addressed to a specific person, that person will first of all give a response, and then if other panelists would like, they can also make a comment on it relating to their tradition. And then we're going to break up into small groups. So we'll do more discussion of how that will take place after these first two phases. So first of all, we'll have the panelists address each other with regard to their hearing and their own presentation. So who would like to begin with a question for another panelist?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm not that learned as everyone else here, but I was interested in this Hajj. This holy site that you went to, is it busy other times of the year?
It is much less busier because people are going for the Umrah, for the lesser pilgrimages, at any time of the year. But say outside of the Hajj, you might have, I don't know, a few 100,000 people visiting and doing these pilgrimages as opposed to 300,000. But now what the Saudi authorities do is, once the Hajj is done and the 3 million people have dispersed, they have to clean up the site essentially. So they close off giving visas for about 2, maybe 3 months to people from outside. So those who are within Saudi Arabia can still access it. Those who are in the Emirates, who are within driving distance, they can still access these holy sites. But all others who would require visas cannot access these sites for at least 2 months because you really need to restore the site essentially. So in those 2 months, it's very empty, and people have told me they're able to go right up to the Kaaba and touch it, and it's not a problem. In fact, my wife had gone, at that time she wasn't my wife, but in 1992 she had gone to do Umrah. And travel was not as easy and as convenient, or as cheap anyway, as it is now. And she said, she was able to go right up to the Kaaba and touch it without any problem. So the flights have become cheaper, means more people are going than ever before, which means more construction and then more restoration.
Thank you.
When I listened to your presentation, what struck me was I felt like my presentation was very individualistic, like it's very introspective about my experience. But when I heard you talk, it felt the corporate element was so strong. It came up a number of times when you were crowded into the, in the crowds that going around or on the train or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Different people perhaps have different
Sure.
experiences.
Sure.
Somebody has said that they have never felt so alone as they did at the Hajj.
Oh, really?
In that
Really,
crowd.
in the midst of 3.5 million people, they've never felt so alone because they were just so zoned in. It was just them and their God. And they said, I was completely alone, even though I was surrounded by. But I think you're right. I mean, for most of us who aren't quite as elevated, thank you. For most of us who aren't quite so spiritually elevated and can't, I mean, the corporate element is important, and the ummah, the community of believers, it does make a profound experience. That
Right.
you are, as one of our guests was saying to me during the break, you are just a drop in the ocean.
Right,
You
that's
really
my
feel
phrase,
that,
right.
right? You really sense that,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah. I want to ask each one of you, what were the highs and lows? I mean, I think I experienced some of the highs of your pilgrimages. But I also conveyed some of the lows that I experienced. What were the lows in your pilgrimages, and how would you make sense of those lows?
Here, I'll take this. So,
You're-
oh, I have a
you're hooked up
microphone on.
already.
Yeah. So for me, I guess the holiest site, and probably my high point would be at the Western Wall,
Yes.
which is the Kotel.
Yes.
And I wrote a little note, and each time I was there, and put a note into the wall, which was a highlight. This third trip, because I was with these Orthodox Jews, our Shabbat, our holy day, is from sunset Friday to sunset Saturday. So we actually started that in Shabbat at the Kotel and ended at the Kotel, and that was huge. I'll probably never do that again. That was really a high. The low, I'm trying to think. I didn't really have any. There must have been some lows.
Maybe there was.
Yeah, no, it was all great. Certainly, the trip that included Poland had low and sensitive side.
Sure.
I didn't really have anything that I would say was particularly negative. I'll think about that, though. Yeah.
Sure.
The one that occurs to me immediately is I ran into physical problems along the way. So after a couple of weeks, I had really bad blisters.
Your feet.
And like,
Yeah.
no, that was somebody else. But on my one foot, I like to call it a bagel-sized blood blister.
Oh.
And I ended up in emergency, and I got it tended. And so that was. I mentioned that my wife walked with me, and then she went home after 10 days. And so part of what happened was, and this is absolutely predictable, I wouldn't have missed her as much if I had just gone on the trip. But when she came for 10 days and then disappeared, it was a lot harder. And so I sped up my pace, essentially, because I was eager to get home. And I walked too fast. And so I got that taken care of, and I got different footwear, and that all helped. But at the end, again, I didn't get blisters at the end, but I got tendinitis at the end, which meant that I was going too fast. And so those were the two hard things. It was very painful walking that way. But what struck me was, so here I am on this exalted pilgrimage, opportunity of a lifetime, and the usual temptations that bother me back home of doing too much, doing too fast, trying to get too much done. Here this was happening on this exalted spiritual retreat. And so I thought that was quite telling, and I needed to hear about that.
In fact, some of our teachers had warned us not to go too quickly, and they had said, in your enthusiasm, you might want to do the tawaf too quickly or push yourself and do more and extra.
Okay.
And they said, pace yourselves.
Right.
And I was wondering, why does it have to be so tough? Well, why does it have to be so challenging to make sense of these kinds of lows? And
as one of the audience members was asking me during the break, and I thought to myself, well, so that when I come back into my normal life, it doesn't seem quite as hard anymore, right? It's a lot
Right.
easier. I've raised my game during the
Right.
pilgrimage, and then I realized, oh, whatever problems I thought I had, actually,
Exactly.
they're not so big.
That's right.
When you stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. Well, it gives you a lot of appreciation for your daily life then too, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Do you have other questions or comments for each other with respect to each other's presentation, or shall we go on to the questions of the audience?
Well, I just say that in Diana and Ali's presentation, I really enjoyed how both of them talked about being deepened in their heritage and more deeply connected with your community of faith. I thought that came strongly through both of the presentations.
If I can borrow the mic. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the questions that you have written down and that were stimulated by the presentations. It's interesting to me. I'll pick two and read both of them because they're, in a sense, a negative and a positive way of approaching the same question or topic. And they're also very much a dynamic that's created just when we hear the questions without even hearing responses. So the first, I'll start with the positive. Intriguing that regardless of religious background, there's a desire to seek connection with others of the same faith and with your faith within yourself. Insight that pilgrimage draws many back again and again, and it comes as a state of being a connection to desire to repeat. And I'll link that with, does pilgrimage make us more open or more closed to other religious views? And so we'll just hear from each of you first.
Do you want to go?
Belonging to a community already, of course, establishes borders, right? Whenever you include, you automatically also exclude. There's no denying that. So being part of a community has this double-edged sword. But the question is, how exclusive or how rigidly do we define the boundaries of our community? So for me, I kept saying, well, this was the center and the origin of, say, the Islamic universe, our world. Doesn't mean that that is the only origin and center in the world. I recognize that Hindus have their own center and origin of their religious universe. Christians have their own center and origin to which they return, and Jews themselves. So I don't monopolize to say, well, Kaaba is the only center and origin of the world to which everyone must return. No, this is the place for Muslims. For other religious communities, they have their own. At the same time, as I recognize other communities and have connections with other communities, I recognize that being within a spiritual tradition, a spiritual community, as you, Susan, were explaining, feeling that kind of bond, that kind of connection, that kind of tradition, the shared assumptions and background knowledge without having to say you understand one another in some ways, that's very powerful. And to live uprooted without any community, I think, is a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the things that I'm remembering is in the autobiography of Malcolm X. I don't know if people have read that, but Malcolm X became a black Muslim, and it was a very narrow kind of Islam that he embraced. But one of the significant things in his life was actually making the Hajj. And he talked very eloquently about how that opened them up to people from around the world. So, I mean, I'm not going to speak on behalf of your religion,
you're absolutely right.
yeah.
He said, look, I saw people whom I formerly thought were the devil.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Blue-eyed, blonde-haired men doing the Hajj with me, whom I used to think were the devil.
Right, right.
And red-haired and red-skinned people.
Yeah,
And to see them actually together
Right.
created that sense of community.
yeah, I found that very moving when I read it. Oh, by the way, there is a really wonderful film called Saint-Jacques-le-Mecque, which means St. James of Mecca. And there are a number of interesting characters. Have you seen that, Tom?
Yes.
There are a number of interesting characters in the film, but two of the characters are two young Muslim men. And the one Muslim had persuaded the other Muslim that walking to Santiago was part of going to Mecca. And so that's one of the humorous elements. So I recommend the film. I think pilgrimage could have that effect of making people more narrow and tribal. I think that could be the case. But my experience on the Camino is that, again, there are people from around the world, but it's not only Christians who are walking on the Camino. In fact, most people who walk on the Camino do not identify themselves as Christians. And this is a really good experience for me because I've always been a church person. I grew up in the church, I went to Christian schools, I went to seminary, I've been a pastor, I've taught at seminary. So I'm just totally immersed in, church world. And to spend long quality time, conversations, meals, working hard with people who have diverse viewpoints was very important to me. And for me, that was one of the main lessons that I felt that God was trying to communicate to me on that trip. And that is, I need to pay more attention to people who call themselves spiritual but not religious. And so I've been trying to stay more attuned to that and to address that condition from my own ministry and work.
And I take a little different take on that. If I understand that comment correctly, I think all religions and all cultures like to be with their own. I think Spanish-speaking in Waterloo find other Spanish-speaking. I think Jews in Waterloo find other Jews. Muslims find Muslims. Like I think if I look for a doctor, more when I lived in Toronto than here, I would be comfortable with a Jewish doctor. I think we all look for our own. But in that, is it exclusive? I wonder, and I liked your comment when you're in the pilgrimage and learning more about yourself and talking to other people. I think that the more that you love yourself, the more you can love everyone, and that it's not unusual or negative to be immersed in your own kind, because I think if you're a good person that it expands beyond that.
This is sort of a follow-up, and I'm not sure that the questioner meant it to be a follow-up to this discussion, but I'm going to broaden the question with permission from with unrequested permission from the questioner. So the question is, and we'll start with Diana, and then we'll move toward Ali through Arthur's mediation as well. But the original question is, are non-Muslims permitted to participate in the Hajj? I'd like to open that. Are non-participants in your particular faith group permitted to participate in the pilgrimage that you have just described? So we'll start with Diana,
that's a great question. So the actual trips that I was on were specific to Jews. But again, Jews don't use that word pilgrimage. So I would say everyone can take a trip to Israel. A trip to Israel is the same as a pilgrimage. And it's certainly, when you're in Israel, Jerusalem itself is in 4 quarters. It's 4 different religions present. So it's an opportunity for anyone to go to Israel itself. But I meant to mention during my talk, if any of you have youth or are interested in knowing this, that March of the Living I was on is exclusive to Jews, but there is a program that's offered for all religions that if you're a university student, so again, a lot of this is geared at the youth, to educate the youth, but it's called I think it's called the March of Hope and Redemption, if any of you want to write that down, that any student and anyone who's a university student can go on the March of Hope and Redemption, and it takes you to Poland and a trip through the concentration camp. So, but anyways, really, anyone can go to Israel, but not on the actual trips that I was on.
Well, I just wanted to mention that when I was a very young man, I spent 3 months in Israel, and so I went to a number of the places that you've talked about, and I regarded that as a pilgrimage.
Yes,
going to Israel for sure. Getting in touch with biblical faith and stories. Anybody's welcome to go on the Camino where I walked. If you want to be an official pilgrim, to stay in hostels and get the certificate at the end, you have to declare your motivations. And there are 3 motivations: religious, which is kind of traditional Christian; spiritual, which is vaguer; and then there's also an other category. And I think most people go under the other category. Anyway.
Thanks for raising the question. In fact, as I was ending my answer to the previous one, I was precisely thinking that, yeah, I should be even more specific. The question is asking whether non-Muslims can go on the Hajj, and the short answer is no. And it's a very legitimate question. And in fact, it's not just the Hajj. The Saudi authorities have said non-Muslims cannot enter Mecca, in fact, which, if you think about it historically, during Prophet Muhammad's time, there were non-Muslims in Mecca, right? There were Christians, there were Jews, and pagans and other atheists who were living in Mecca. So, in some sense, what we're confronting here is this desire to maintain a strong sense of community, but it can also become too strong because it becomes this puritanical kind of a movement of wanting to just keep this for the pure. I can understand how wanting to keep the sacred mosque itself for Muslims, and especially during the Hajj for Muslims. But then the question of, well, is all of Makkah sacred? And how far do you go beyond all of Makkah then to make it sacred and say, well, no non-Muslims can? Because when you're coming from Jeddah, you fly from, say, Canada to Jeddah, and then from Jeddah you take a bus, and as you're coming on the bus, you see this sign and it says non-Muslims this way and Muslims this way, right? So because non-Muslims cannot enter into the sacred territory. Well, how far are you going to extend that? That's a legitimate question. Non-Muslims don't have the rights at the moment to build their temples or to their churches or places of worship. This was not the case during the Prophet's time, that there were churches, there were synagogues in Mecca and Medina, and Muslims lived with people whom we call Ahlul Kitab, people of the book, Jews and Christians. So to some extent what we're seeing is this sort of modern desire to purify, and it's going too far. At the same time, I do recognize that certain rites like the Hajj, I think, having a sense of, okay, this is for people in the community, so that we're not distracted by others. Now, non-Muslims have surreptitiously gone on the Hajj.
Sure, yeah.
We have people who've disguised themselves as pilgrims and have come back and written about it. I think Richard Burton is probably one of the most famous ones. Account of the Hajj by somebody who's pretended to have gone as a Muslim. So it's happened. I mean, and by that same token, not everyone who claims to be a Muslim and is in the Hajj is actually in a sacred state, because we've got people who are pickpocketing. We've got a lot of this kind of other kind of activity taking place.
Large crowds.
I thought you didn't have pockets.
Well, so during so I mentioned I had the security belt underneath, right?
Yeah.
So people pull your security belt.
Really?
I mean, or not during the Hajj, but before it, during the Umrah. My friend had a camera and a bag, and actually what happened was he felt this hand, and he grabbed the hand, and it was a lady's hand. She took his wallet, she took it from one hand, took it into her other hand, and then she passed it on to some other guy, and it went. And so it was a team of people, actually.
Right.
So, they're Muslim in name,
Right.
but to what extent are they Muslim in their heart?
Yeah.
So we know what preparation a thief might have. But that leads us to a very good and relevant question here. And for each of you, what personal preparation, both physical and spiritual, was necessary for your particular pilgrimage that you addressed today?
Do you want to start with Arthur? Yeah.
Okay, so for my preparation, I would say there were three things. One is I did a lot of reading about Santiago and the journey and other people who had done the trip. The second is I had to prepare myself physically, so I walked usually an hour a day, and I lived in a place called Elkhart, Indiana, that had one small hill, so I always walked up and down that hill. And I carried a backpack that I progressively threw more phone books into to build up the weight. And then the third thing is that a group of my friends from my church gathered and blessed Lorna and me just before we left. So those were the three things I did for preparation.
So I didn't have a lot of preparation other than having researched these groups. And then once I was in the March of the Living group, there was monthly learning. And I actually did do more reading on my own, because I think the more you read and the more comfortable you are with what you're going to be seeing, it makes more sense. So particularly about the Holocaust, I did quite a lot of personal reading. And I didn't do as much reading about Israel the first time. I did more of the reading afterwards to make more sense out of the things I had seen. So it was more of reading. I didn't do a lot of personal exercise, but I found what you could read on the internet made better sense of what I had seen. So.
There were two different sorts of preparations, not physical. I didn't do any sort of physical training or preparation, but I think there was the logistical aspect, which actually we had to prepare for logistically, because A, there are all these technical rites, so you have to figure those out. Okay, well, where's the sa'i, how many tawaf do we do? You know, where are we going from Mina to Masjid, to Arafah to Muzdalifah? So all of the logistical stuff. We had weekly seminars, essentially, I think about 5 weeks prior to our departure. So 2 to 3 hours where some of this logistical stuff was worked out, and of course all the visa preparations and travel gear and all of that. But then I was doing reading on my own, and two authors in particular. One is a late Irani scholar named Ali Shariati. He talks about the Hajj. And he really talks about this humanity, this mass of people, and you know, he talks about it in terms of everybody becoming part of this. He would use the term class, working class, like we all become essentially part of the average everyday person. And to contrast that, the other scholar I read was Sayyid Hussein Nasser, American Iranian scholar, whose work has influenced me quite a bit, and you would have seen undertones of that in my talk. Is he's much more talking about cosmology and the sacred center and all of that, and so that was mental preparation. Now all of this happened during my sabbatical, so I had that year. My wife and I were thinking, what are we going to do during the sabbatical? And we said, well, we want to do some traveling, and we did end up later going to Pakistan and Turkey and places, but the first thing we said we have to do is do the Hajj. Everything else has to follow. So there was that kind of preparation.
Thank you. Someone actually took the trouble to give a specific question to each of you. So I'm going to start with Diana, and then Arthur and Ali, so that I can hand the mic at the very end. For Diana, both Ali and Arthur referred to prayers as part of their experience. And you made a reference to putting a piece of paper in the wall. Could you speak a little bit about prayer in your pilgrimage?
Yeah. So I think everyone's version of prayer is different. If you just pray in your head, or if you need to be in a physical building, or if you go to weekly services. I feel like a spiritual person. I just kind of pray in my head. But in Israel, you can put little prayers like into the kotel, into the wall, and that was significant to try to take the words out of my head and write them down and put them into the wall. You know, so just one more part. When I was with the very religious women, they do like the serious, you know, the kind of the back and forth and the very, you know, half an hour of the praying. And, you know, I only need a minute of the praying. And I think everyone just has a little different version of it. But that was all I needed. You know, I felt spiritual to be at the wall, and I felt spiritual to put the little note in and in my own head saying something, but I didn't personally need it to be bigger than that.
Arthur, for you, what are the other two European pilgrimage places? I think you made reference to more than one European pilgrimage place.
So I don't know if this is what the question is asking, but in medieval times there were three primary Christian destinations: Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela.
Oh.
Yeah.
And have the other two sustained, or are they not as much a pilgrimage place now?
Oh, they're both big pilgrimage
Also
places
big,
still.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Why
Ali,
Rome? Why Rome? Can you just...
Because that was the headquarters of the church, of the Western Church.
Rome.
And Peter, the Apostle Peter, and the Apostle Paul were executed there, so their relics are there. So there's a lot of Christian history bound up with Rome.
Good, thank you. And for Ali, is 7 an important number in Islam? Why 7 times? Why 7 tones? So the number 7 that came up in your presentation.
Oh, that here's mine.
Oh, there's a mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
In a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. I think, nobody knows the precise reason why. I mean, there's 7 heavens that are mentioned in the Quran, 7 Tawaf, and sometimes Muslims do privilege odd numbers. So when we're lining up in prayers in rows, often people will prefer to have odd numbered rows, 1, 3, 5, 7. What the reason is, God knows. I don't know. But there does seem to be some preference. I don't know why. Yeah. And then, I mean, there's also the 7 times running between Safa and Marwa, the sa'i, right? To replicate or to reproduce what Hagar was doing. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, is it literally that she ran 7 times, or is it symbolically? Likely symbolically, but why? I don't know.
Thank you. Okay, so we have, as you know, a pile of questions more. We also have 2 more components to our panel's presentations today, and that is breaking up into 3 small groups with a panelist in each of the 3 groups so that you can both discuss with them more specifically and personally, and also out of that, you can appoint a person to write down a question or 2 that will come back for final discussion at the end and bring closure. So with my apologies to those who wrote questions that we didn't get to, I'd like us to now pick one of 3 areas, and each of the 3 panelists will join one of those areas, and I'll hand out more paper and more pens as necessary, and we'll move into that particular unit. So we'll have a group here, a group maybe either at the back there or the back here, and then a 3rd group here. So we'll move into those small groups now. Thank you. Standard structure of the room where we had the 3 panelists at the front, and everyone else was kind of sort of facing in that direction toward the panelists. And we have simply 2 things left to do. So I'll just give us another minute and a half, 90 seconds to rearrange the seats and have the panelists come back up to the front, and then we'll pick up and we'll bring this fine session to a close. Thank you. We're moving into the landing stage, and soon we'll be at the airport, and we'll be able to get our feet back on the ground. But this has been an amazing flight, and I particularly thank our pilots and the places that they've taken us. So we're going to look at just a couple of questions. We don't have a lot of time left, but just a couple of questions that we can sort of bring our heads back together. And in fact, a question that came from 2 of the groups is very, very similar. And so from one group, the question is, where is sacred found? And the other one is, what is sacred ground? So I guess the concept of sacred, or that which makes pilgrimage particular to each of your particular either religious or cultural settings. So I'll pass it to Ali first, and then we'll head through Arthur and Diana.
And that first question, could you just repeat it? Where is the sacred, or what is the sacred?
Where is the sacred found? And then the second question that sort of is similar.
Sacred ground.
Where is sacred ground? Sacred.
Yeah, so where is the sacred? Certainly, on a physical level, we'd say, okay, look, these are sacred sites. But beyond all that, the life of one human being is more sacred than the Grand Mosque. Right? For us, as sacred as this Masjid al-Haram is, as this Kaaba is, the life of one individual is more sacred than this incredibly sacred territory. Right? I mean, there's a hadith, there's a prophetic saying that the world could not contain God, but the heart of a believer is able to contain God. That, the heart of the believer is the sacred, because it contains God. it's not the physical territory. Of course, we respect physical spaces, and we need these physical spaces to move to walk to. We need to live out in physical ways what we believe and what we think. But to think that the physical itself is the sacred is to transpose what actually is ephemeral onto a physical thing. I mean, you know, so the sacred is not just out there, it's actually all around.
I think it's, we know that there are certain experiences that we can have or certain places that we go where there's a more intense feeling of the sacred. But for me, what's important, and I think it's similar to what Ali is saying, and that is the importance of those experiences is not to say that only other places are sacred. The importance of those experiences is to help us see what's sacred within our own life and to value that, to be good stewards of that. There's a story, I'm going to use this in a sermon tomorrow, so you can let me know whether this works or not. I believe it's a true story. And I don't know whether it really happened, but I believe it's true. And there was a man who was involved in a church, and he was quite involved with the church. And then because of his job, he had to move to another place. And he ended up going to an Anglican church. And that was a new experience for him, especially because Anglicans celebrate the Eucharist or communion every week. And one day, an old friend of his from the former congregation came and visited him. They went out to a restaurant. They were having soup together, and they were getting caught up. And so the old friend said, "Well, what's church like?" And the fellow said, "Well, I like church quite a bit. It's good like our other church was. I thought I would really have trouble getting used to taking communion every week." And the fellow said, "Well, what's that like? What's it like taking communion every week?" He says, "Well, it's kind of a nuisance." He says, "Because now," and then he lifted up a roll from beside his plate. He says, "Now I can't even eat a meal without thinking about God." And so the point is that the sacrament of communion, which happens in a privileged kind of way, is not to tell us that that's a set apart place, that we can only access God there. It's somehow to help us, teach us how do we relate to God wherever we are in our daily life.
Okay, there's nothing that I can add to either of those. Either of those. Those were wonderful comments, both of you. Yeah.
Okay, so before we have a couple of words of closure, this is the third annual series. Our first series 3 years ago dealt with feminism in the Abrahamic traditions. Last year we looked at mysticism, and this year at pilgrimage. We very much appreciate your participation and your passion to come and to engage, and we would like your ideas. So Marilyn and I will welcome topics that we would like to explore in the future, that you would like us to explore in the future. So if you don't mind mentioning to Marilyn or to myself before you leave today, we'd very much appreciate that, and that can become an extension of what came out of our first 3 years of these sessions, and we very much appreciate the involvement that you've given us. Arthur spoke in my poetic mind of feet of faith, and I looked through the table of contents of one of his books, and I saw that expression there as well, and it really does capture how pilgrimage really involves a personal application and a feet on the ground type engagement. Ali gave me the poetic image of a sea of souls, and that sense of being consumed in the oneness of a greater than our individual selves, while in a world where individualism is so sacred. And then Diana reinforced the idea of perpetuity of pilgrimage. Just how are we going to do this again? And the imaginative and creative ways in which we can find ourselves continually engaging in these ideas that become pilgrimages for us. So each has stimulated my poetic mind, and for that I thank each of you. And I think we should say that not only do we have a token of our appreciation for your involvement, but just as Ali mentioned that when he came back from pilgrimage, the pilgrimage stayed within him. And I think it's true that today, while we came to enjoy and appreciate their views of pilgrimage, when we leave, this experience remains within us as we leave. So I'd like us to show our appreciation for each of the speakers. Thank you. So again, as you leave, please leave Marilyn or myself with ideas of the next topic. And again, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing of yourselves.